Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. Looking so fresh, so early in the morning. Well done, well done.
Dr. Reuben, do you want me to faint with all of these compliments? I'll fall down, please. Don't do too much to me. Good morning to you, Dr. Reuben, and thank you for the wonderful compliment. Oh, you just gingered me all the way up. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're doing well, Ayo and Rufai. Let me tell you about what's happening around the world. And now I have to recalibrate because that compliment from Dr. Reuben has really thrown me for a loop, I have to say. Let me tell you what happened at the UN General Assembly. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas delivered his remarks at the general debate, and it was welcomed and ended with a huge round of applause, an extended round of applause. He talked a lot about the plight of Palestinian people, and also he had very strong messaging for Israel. What he said was, we will not leave. Palestine is our homeland, and if anyone should leave, it is our occupier. He also went on to say that Israel is perpetuating a full-scale war of genocide and needs to have its UN membership stripped from it. And many people, judging by the applause in the room, seem to agree. And even outside of the general debate stage, outside of the United Nations headquarters, on the streets of New York, we're based out in Midtown Manhattan, there was a huge showing of pro-Palestinian support. Actually, very late into the evening yesterday, into the early hours of the morning, there was a lot of police cordons, roads being closed because they were expecting 20,000 pro-Palestinian protesters to descend on the streets surrounding the United Nations headquarters to not only make clear their presence and their support of the Palestinian people, but also to allow Benjamin Netanyahu, who will be making his remarks today, that he is doing so in front of a crowd that is largely in support of the Palestinian plight. So it was very, very interesting to hear what he had to say. And of course, we can expect that there will equally be very strong messaging coming from Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu. When he takes the stage today, he will have the opportunity to talk about the crimes that he believes have been perpetrated against the Israeli people, the strikes there, the people who have had to move homes, the deaths that have been suffered there. Also, the plight of the people still being taken hostage after Hamas's attack from October 7th. So there's definitely a lot of very strong words, a lot of discord, a lot of disdain going back and forth between the Palestinian leader and expected to be from the Israeli Prime Minister. And of course, this is happening against the backdrop of a whole host of protests taking place across the streets of New York. Moving on now, and I do want to also talk to you about some issues that were happening on the stage too. Away from Middle East and looking at Africa, Kenyan President William Ruto also took to the stage, and he reiterated a consensus that it has seemed to be a common thread amongst the African leaders at the UN General Debate, starting from the Nigerian Vice President, also the President of Ghana, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. William Ruto joined them to say that at some point the United Nations Security Council does need to have an overhaul, that there needs to be a special focus on the fact that as it stands now, there is so much conflict. Not only are we seeing what's happening in the Middle East, there's also the situation that we're seeing in Darfur of Sudan, which reminds me of another protest that took place directly opposite the United Nations headquarters yesterday. And also what we're seeing in Ukraine, what we're seeing in Haiti. And you know that Kenya has very special interest in Haiti, being that it's trying to develop a UN peacekeeping mission in the country with almost more than 1,000 Kenyan police officers already in Haiti, helping the security forces there keep some form of stability while gangland violence and street violence and extrajudicial murders continue to be a real nuisance in that island nation. So yeah, very, very harsh words again coming from the African countries, them calling on the United Nations to really put their money where their mouth is when it comes to extending a permanent seat at the table for the Security Council. You know, Ayo, you made a very wonderful point yesterday that even if a seat is given to an African country or a country in Latin America or perhaps even in South Asia, they won't. It's proposed that they won't enjoy the same amount of power as the other people at the table. They won't have the power to veto. So again, it reignites conversations about inequities and how far we are, or how far this institution is as a global space, if they're going to be perpetuating different types of inequalities when it comes to security in the country. Moving on now to some sideline events that took place at UNGA, and on the side of UNGA just yesterday, there was a lot of very interesting issues. So firstly, the Nigerian Governance Forum, they had a collaborative meeting with the United Nations within the confines of the United Nations headquarters yesterday. And you had lots of different governors. You had the governor of Niger State, you had the governor of Plateau State, also the governor of Benue State, lots of different commissioners. You had also the Minister of Women Affairs, Uju Kennedy Ohaneye. She was also participating in that meeting that we were able to sit in on and take a listen to what they had to say. So in addition to talking about different efforts varying sustainability goals, they also announced the coming of $750 million of investment coming from the World Bank in order to invest in healthcare in Nigeria. And there were also other investments looking at promoting quality education of women and girls across Nigeria. My colleague Adesua Giwa Osagie also sat in on that meeting with us and will definitely give you far more updates in her report coming later on today. So that was quite interesting to see what presence, aside from the main stage, the Nigerian government at different levels, because they're calling it subnational, but of course there was representation from the federal government as well as commissioners within state and governors too. It was very interesting to see them put together their own profiles and their own little PowerPoint presentations. Each of these representatives had about 2.5 minutes to deliver what is going on in their states, in their communities, and show the United Nations, who had quite sobering statistics for Africa and for Nigeria, what plans it has in place to reach certain sustainable development goals. Moving on now to another event on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, and it was Afreximbank, Africa's Import-Export Bank, who hosted a conversation which is seeking to launch a book and also launch a documentary. The documentary is actually very, very interesting. It looks at the journey that Africa had to face in order to secure COVID-19 vaccines for people on the continent. If you cast your minds back to 2020, 2021 and thereabouts, when the conversation about many countries being very protectionist, about a big pharma only being able to deliver a certain amount of vaccines to different areas, COVAX really not being able to deliver the amount of vaccines needed, especially to the global south. It was, of course, Afreximbank who stood up, who stepped in and was able to secure vaccines not only for African countries but also for countries in the Caribbean. I spoke to the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, about this very thing, about how Afrexim came to its rescue, and here's what she had to say. Let's take a listen.
Very good. The bad thing is giving you a promise that looks like a beautiful cake in the sky. You see,
as I've said over and over, Africa Exim Bank was able in those early days to provide the financing for all of us who participated in the Africa Medical Supplies platform. That was the only platform that we had access to that gave us a chance to get PPE, a chance to get therapeutics, a chance to get vaccines, and to do it at the same price as a country like Nigeria that was multiple times bigger than a country that's St. Kitts and Nevis with 38,000 people. So this was literally a lifeline, and the solidarity that was exhibited both there with this platform and then ultimately at a parallel track with Ministers of Finance and Health in Africa was superb. And then after we turned the corner, in fact, not even when we fully turned the corner, Professor Orama would have come to Barbados to establish the relationship between the Caribbean and Afrexim Bank, and the rest is history. They have an office in Barbados now. We're happy to host them, and we're happy to work together collectively because we understand the importance of partnership and solidarity.
Partnership and solidarity. So it was quite a refreshing reminder of what the world went through when we were looking at the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll all remember that back at that time, the narrative was when COVID hits the African continent, it's going to obliterate it. And we do know that it was sort of the opposite. Absolutely, COVID did reach African shores, but it wasn't as debilitating as many people around the world thought it was going to be. South Africa, Nigeria also being able to lead the front when it comes to resistance. You remember South Africa also being able to identify another strain of the COVID-19 vaccine, only for the international community to kind of turn its back on South Africa. So it was, again, very interesting to listen to how, when you cast your mind back to such a devastating time in history, it was African institutions who stood up and protected African communities on the continent and beyond, especially looking towards the Caribbean. Let's continue on away from the United Nations General Assembly and look at some information coming out of different parts of the world. British supermodel Naomi Campbell has been banned from being on the board of the trustees for any charitable organisation for 5 years in England and in Wales. This is the ramification and a byproduct of an investigation, a 4 to 5 year investigation into the charitable donations or the charitable organisations that Naomi Campbell sits on. So what we are seeing is that the institutions and the investigation has led to accusations that thousands of pounds worth of charity funds were used to pay for personal luxuries. According to their investigations, they're accusing Naomi Campbell or people close to her of using charitable funds to pay for luxury hotels, luxury holidays, and even cigarettes. We do know that Naomi Campbell has actually spoken out against this update and says that she's actually not the person in charge of these charitable organizations and has not done what she's accused of doing. Again, this is happening at a time of celebration for the British supermodel. She received a national honor in France, congratulating her and honoring her for her contributions to arts as, of course, an iconic supermodel. But very, very interesting to see the juxtaposition between what the British narrative is as it pertains to her adoption and her involvement in these charitable organizations, again, happening against the backdrop of France honoring the supermodel and congratulating her for a career of huge proportions. So very much a very interesting prospect that we're seeing there. It will be interesting to see whether or not she will appeal against the decision, whether or not she will still fight to remain a part of a board of trustees for any other charitable organizations in the future. But as it stands now for England and for Wales for the next 5 years, she'll be barred from participating in any type of charitable organizations as a board of trustees member.
Real quickly, Adefemi, that's very sad coming from Naomi Campbell there. And it has to be said strongly that money that is supposed to be for charitable causes must be used for charitable causes, not for luxury hotels. But she just shot herself in the foot, and definitely, her integrity definitely is at stake, and it's going to definitely affect her career for a very long time to come. As regards the talk on COVID and Afreximbank trying to release a documentary evidence of what they did during COVID, I mean, they deserve due commendation as regards what they did all over the continent. The warp speed at which they were able to facilitate those vaccines coming into the African continent, the distribution mechanism, and the solidarity with a lot of scientists. But I must also say, all the things we have learned for COVID, what have we done with those lessons? Have we forgotten any of them? Our health infrastructure is up to date today. Where are all the ventilators in those centers across Africa? Where are all the healthcare infrastructure? Where are all the gurney? Where are all the beds and all of that? Because if with the infrastructure we invested for COVID, we had put that in primary healthcare centers, that's PHCs and all of that, we should be able to have a healthcare system that is marginally a lot more better. But I think to a large extent, we have gone back to pre-COVID days. We have probably not learned anything. Our corrupt officials have taken most of those monies. We cannot account for it today. And the cycle continues.
All right, the cycle continues. Dr. Chikwe Hekwazu wrote a book of his experience, and he detailed how he met the NCDC when he came on board and the challenges they were able to overcome during COVID, some of the things they did. So I think it's quite important, like you've said, to really look and reflect as to what lessons have been learned. But beyond that is also the funds secured at UNGA. by Nigerian government and a few people. And I just think it's important to highlight them, because when we know these things, then we're able to hold them to account in terms of what have you done with the monies pledged or monies received. It's not enough to just say, oh, we've been able to get, this commitment and that commitment, which is fantastic. But it's even more important to see the impact of those commitments. So, for instance, the Gates Foundation gave $600,000 to Borno flood relief and also to some other health initiatives. It would be great to track how the money is being spent and how the government has managed it. Finally, I have to touch on Naomi Campbell. I say this because the Charity Commission is the body responsible for not-for-profit agencies or companies in the United Kingdom, well, in England and Wales, and they are very strict. If there's anything around impropriety, or they feel that monies that was donated by people towards a charitable cause wasn't used for the purpose, they will come very hard on the trustees. And unfortunately, ignorance or the fact that you're not in control of the charity is not going to be an excuse. And 5 years in the interim is sad if, like she said, that she didn't know how the money was being, managed. But to be honest, it was for Fashion for Relief over the years where she was raising money again for poverty, to give grants to organizations to eradicate poverty, to tackle education and health challenges. So it's important to mention, and this is what happens when we have oversight function that works. We need that in Nigeria as well, because a lot of charities some charities spend a chunk of their money on administration as opposed to actually meeting the needs for which they were set up for. So I'm hoping that I should be able to clear her name, but it's important to see just the importance of oversight function.
Okay, I hope there is still enough time for me to make important contributions as follows. Now, Mahmoud Abbas, when he addressed the United Nations General Assembly, was very clear. He accused Israel of genocide, and he accused the Western powers of hypocrisy. And he made a point clearly that we will not leave. This is against the background of pro-Palestinian protesters who are taking over mid-Manhattan and later lower Manhattan. About a dozen other persons were arrested. Now today, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to address the UN General Assembly. And before leaving Israel, he made it very clear that he disagrees, or he did not even recognize the 21-day ceasefire being proposed by the U.S. and its allies. In fact, his office called it the American-France, proposal, which means that it will be interesting to hear what he has to say today and whether the protests will continue. Zelensky, the Ukraine, president, met yesterday with Kamala Harris, and the conversation is about what will happen. But you can imagine Zelensky is looking for support. He's looking for support for his own country. President Ruto also addressed the UN General Assembly. Well, he's just looking for spotlight. After all, his country is leading the mission in Haiti. He met with U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and also, he saw it more or less the same things that the Nigerian president said about debt relief, climate action, and all of that. These African leaders who go there to ask for debt relief and all of that, they are staying in the most expensive hotels in New York, which is the irony when our leaders go there and they say, give us debt forgiveness, help us with climate action. Some of the leaders from Europe are sharing budget hotels around New York. But in any case, that's another story.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. We'll run through the newspapers very, very quickly. Let's start with the front page of This Day. This Day features the editor-in-chief of This Day and also the chairman of Arise Media Group, Prince Nduka Obaegbena, and his conversations talking about the state of security in Nigeria. He did actually call for an inclusive all-of-government approach to solving Nigeria's insecurity problems. Let's move on now to the front page of The Guardian, still talking about Nigeria and its leadership. You can see the caricature of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And The Guardian is looking at Nigeria's international profile being under repute due to the country's many challenges of insecurity, power, inflation and poverty, amongst many others. being the internal crises that's affecting how Nigeria is looking internationally. Let's also take a look at the front page of the New Telegraph. And the New Telegraph has a quote from the winner of the Edo State gubernatorial election, Monday Okpebelo, saying that he expects his opponents to congratulate him. And I suspect he'll be waiting a long time for his opponents to congratulate him, being that many of them don't believe that he's the rightful winner of that election, as accusations of impropriety, of voter irregularities continue to mar that election. The Daily Trust now, it focuses on how flooding in Niger State has displaced 82 communities. And you can see the photos on the front page there, just another devastating level of the crises that we're seeing there, the climate crises. We also spoke to the governor of Niger State on the sidelines of UNGA about these different types of issues. And then moving on now to The Punch. The Punch finally leads with the federal government starting the beginning of payments of salaries reflecting this new minimum wage, and they go on to talk about how much all of these different institutions, different federal workers will be receiving as income. Very quickly, let's move on to some African papers now. And the Daily Nation of Kenya again takes a look at the conglomerate Adani, which is Indian-owned, and their dealings with William Ruto, who, since coming into power, has forged very close relationships with different business entities. But again, that follows criticism, or rather, it's being trailed by criticisms of secrecy. Tell the people what you're negotiating with them. Let them understand what is happening so they don't feel as though their country is being overrun by foreign interests. And then also, you'll see the faces, heartbreakingly, of the 21 children who lost their lives in the Endarasha school fire. They were all buried in a mass funeral yesterday. Moving on now to an international paper, and we'll just finish off with The Guardian of the UK, which has Elon Musk saying that no one should go to the United Kingdom. And this is because he was denied an invitation to attend a business investment summit in the country. Those are the stories I have for you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Adefemi. Elon Musk can throw tantrums, but the UK has said he's not invited. Thank you very much for your time with us this morning, and enjoy the weekend. See you again on Monday.